The slip that shattered the room, the soft hum of jazz music filtered through the grand banquet hall of the Four Seasons Beverly Hills. Candles flickered atop tables draped in ivory linen, and silverware glistened under the chandeliers. The atmosphere buzzed with quiet elegance, and conversations rippled like silk across the room, the kind of setting where powerful men closed powerful deals over vintage wine and whispered assurances. Tonight, the air carried the weight of something much larger than just business. It carried the expectation of history in the making. At the center table sat Carter Drake, 38, sharp-jawed and colder than the wine in his glass. CEO of Drake Nova Technologies, Carter had built an empire on artificial intelligence, automation, and arrogance. He wore his wealth not just in his Italian-made suit, but in the way he tilted his head when others spoke, always just enough to say, "You're not on my level." Tonight, he wasn't just here to dine. He was here to secure a $200 million deal with Elliot Stone, the silent billionaire who rarely invested in people, but often in purpose. Elliot Stone, 72, was the opposite of Carter. Gray-haired and calm, he was known as the Silent Storm in investment circles. He rarely raised his voice, but when he made decisions, industries shifted. His company, Stone Holdings, had turned quiet startups into global revolutions. He watched more than he spoke, calculated more than he claimed. And tonight, he had come not just to eat, but to observe the man who wanted his backing. Between Carter and Elliot, the table brimmed with a dance of tension and pleasantries. Forks tapped plates, glasses clinked lightly, but every word carried weight. One misstep, one poorly chosen phrase, could tip the balance. Naomi Bennett, 26, walked with practiced grace between the tables. A waitress by title, but far more by presence, she moved not just with trays, but with respect, for herself, for others, and for the job she had learned to perfect. With warm brown eyes and tightly braided hair pulled back into a neat bun, she had been serving the elite at this hotel for 3 years. She knew when to speak, when to smile, and when to disappear into the background. She also knew Carter Drake's reputation. Everyone did. As she approached Carter's table with a fresh bottle of Bordeaux, her mind focused solely on the task. The bottle was tilted perfectly, her steps measured, but the floor had been freshly waxed near the kitchen, and Naomi felt it just as her foot slid slightly. It wasn't a fall, more of a wobble. But in that brief moment, a few drops of the rich red wine slipped from the mouth of the bottle and splattered across Carter's pristine white cuff. The jazz band didn't stop, but time did. Carter looked down at his sleeve, lips curling. Slowly he raised his eyes to meet Naomi's. The entire table paused, watching, holding breath. Naomi's voice was calm and clear. "I'm terribly sorry, sir. Please allow me to clean." But Carter didn't let her finish. He leaned back in his chair, lifted his wrist with disdain, and said the words that would echo louder than any orchestra. "Don't touch me, you stupid girl." And then, in a voice meant to pierce the quiet, he added, "You stupid black girl." It was like a shot fired in a sanctuary. Forks froze mid-air. Polite laughter died in throats. Phones tilted quietly, cameras switched on without clicks. The soft clatter of glass halted. Even the jazz band missed a beat. Naomi stood still, the bottle still in her hand, her other holding the towel. She didn't cry, she didn't gasp, she didn't run. Instead, she stood taller, her chin lifted a fraction. Her eyes didn't dart, they locked. Carter adjusted his cuff as if brushing off the inconvenience and muttered, "Great, win my night," more to himself than anyone else. Elliot Stone hadn't moved, not a blink, not a twitch. But the expression on his face had changed from calm to unreadable. Naomi placed the bottle gently on the table. Her voice was even, respectful but firm. "Excuse me." She nodded slightly, turned, and walked away, shoulders square, spine straight. At the neighboring tables, the discomfort was tangible. A young executive from Drake Nova let out a nervous chuckle, too thin, too forced. Someone else coughed into their napkin to break the silence. Elliot placed his fork down slowly, each second of silence stacking like bricks. Then he leaned back in his chair, hands folded in his lap, and studied Carter as if seeing him for the first time. "Something wrong?" Carter asked, trying to smooth over the moment. "Accidents happen." She should watch her step. She did, Elliot said, his voice quiet. Carter laughed, adjusting his cufflinks again. Come on, Elliot, don't tell me a clumsy girl's mistake is going to change your mind about the deal. But the older man didn't answer. He looked toward the door Naomi had exited through, then back at Carter. A few moments later, Elliot's aide stepped away from the wall and discreetly slipped out a side door, phone in hand. Carter noticed, but ignored it. The remainder of dinner limped forward like a train missing wheels. Conversations struggled to restart. Carter tried to steer the talk back toward quarterly projections and growth margins, but the energy was gone. Something had shifted. The room was no longer his. Control had slipped through his fingers the moment he chose words sharper than knives, forgetting that cameras don't need flashes to blind. By dessert, Elliot Stone stood. Thank you for the evening, he said to Carter, who was already halfway to shaking his hand. You'll have the paperwork tomorrow morning, Carter replied, eager to seal the moment. But Elliot didn't reach for the handshake. Instead, he simply said, I believe I've seen enough. Then he walked out. Carter watched. Let him go. Stunned. Around him, murmurs began like wind through trees. He turned toward his VP, whispering urgently, Call him, apologize, fix it. The VP only nodded, but even he knew some things don't get fixed. Not with money, not with charm, especially not when the world had just watched a powerful man reduce another to less than human. And Naomi? She stood behind the door in the service corridor, hands shaking just slightly now, but not from fear. From restraint, from pride, from the strange, sharp ache that comes when you're humiliated but refuse to be broken. She didn't know what Elliot Stone would do. She didn't know the world had just witnessed her stand in silence while a man exposed his character to every lens in the room. But she knew this. She still had her dignity. And dignity, unlike power, doesn't fall apart under pressure. The fall begins. The next morning, Los Angeles woke to a different kind of earthquake, one that didn't shake the ground but rattled the glass towers of power. The incident from the Four Seasons banquet the night before had not only been seen, it had been recorded, clipped, subtitled, and shared. What started as a silent video posted by an unknown intern just past midnight had turned into a viral storm by sunrise. The words, "Don't touch me, you stupid black girl," were now headlines, hashtags, and breaking news alerts. The footage showed Carter Drake sneering, the still image of Naomi standing tall with the bottle frozen in her hand, and the captions lit up every screen from phones in Brooklyn to boardrooms in Tokyo. Inside the penthouse office of Drake Nova Technologies, Carter was on the 48th floor, pacing like a lion that had chewed its own tail. His assistant Jonah stood by the double-glass doors, his phone ringing non-stop as the PR team kept cycling through new versions of apologies they couldn't agree on. Carter's face was pale, not from guilt, he hadn't accepted that yet, but from confusion, disbelief, and the slow, rising heat of panic. "How bad is it?" Carter finally asked. Jonah hesitated. "It's everywhere, sir. Morning shows, business channels, Twitter, TikTok, even Reddit. The footage has gone international. Hashtags are trending in 4 continents. Your quote was, captioned in 6 languages by breakfast." Carter ran a hand through his gelled hair. "Over a wine spill?" Jonah didn't answer. "No one's talking about how she almost ruined my suit. I'm the CEO of one of the top 10 tech firms in the world, and now I'm trending like some reality TV reject." Jonah's eyes flicked to the wall-mounted TV screen. CNN was looping the video, pausing on Naomi's still figure while commentators debated workplace dignity, systemic prejudice, and the power of silent resistance. "It's not just the words, sir, it's the way she stood there, with dignity, the contrast. It hit people." Carter's jaw clenched. "Elliot hasn't responded to any of my calls." "He won't," came a voice from the doorway. It was Priya Monroe, head of legal, and a woman who didn't knock because she knew she didn't have to. She walked in briskly, tablet in hand, and dropped it onto Carter's desk. "Elliot Stone just made a public statement," she said. "He's withdrawing from the $200 million deal." Carter's face froze. "What?" Priya didn't blink. He gave a simple quote to Bloomberg. When a man shows you who he is, believe him the first time. My investments reflect not just vision, but values. The silence that followed was heavy. Get me a lawyer, Carter barked. You have one, Priya said sharply. And I'm telling you, you can't sue Elliot. He didn't breach anything. There was no signed agreement, just a letter of intent. He's clean. You're not. Carter dropped into his chair, the leather creaking under the weight of something heavier than money. Then we spin it. Say the video was edited. Say she provoked me. Say it was taken out of context. Jonah and Priya exchanged a look. One of those looks people share when they both realize they're standing beside a man still clinging to a ship already sinking. People watched it live, Carter, Priya said. It wasn't a secret recording. It happened in front of hundreds of witnesses, investors, partners, hotel staff. It's not just about the footage. It's about how you handled it, how you doubled down. I was provoked, he snapped. No, Priya said calmly. You were exposed. She turned and walked out. The room fell still. Carter leaned back, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how one sentence had unraveled a future carefully constructed with numbers, projections, and press releases. But numbers can't save you when the world starts counting the cost of your character. Naomi Bennett woke up to 3 missed calls from her mother and over 100 unread messages. At first, she thought something bad had happened, her heart thudding as she unlocked the screen. Then she saw the video of her. She stood in the kitchen of her small apartment, the tiny coffee maker gurgling behind her as she watched herself on national TV, her stillness, her quiet dignity, her lack of reaction. It was surreal. She remembered the moment clearly, the heat on her cheeks, the prickle behind her eyes. But she also remembered the moment after, the moment she chose not to break. Then her phone rang again. It was Mrs. Rivera, the hotel manager. Naomi, her voice was breathless. Are you all right? Naomi's throat felt tight. I think so. You've been trending since dawn, Rivera said. Listen, I just wanted to tell you, whatever happens, we're behind you. And, Naomi, there's a lawyer who called, a civil rights group. They want to talk to you. They're offering representation, free of charge. Naomi sat down slowly at the kitchen table. Why, she asked. Because the world saw what we all saw. And for once, the world's listening. Naomi wasn't used to being the center of attention. Her life had always been background music, pleasant, quiet, respectful. But now the spotlight wasn't just on her. It was following her. Within the next few hours, she would receive calls from Oprah's producers, offers from activist groups, and a job interview request from a foundation started by Michelle Obama. But she didn't know that yet. For now, she sat quietly in her kitchen, phone in hand, coffee going cold beside her, realizing that something had shifted. Not just in her life, but in the way people saw her. And Carter? Carter spent the next 2 days watching sponsors back out of his company's upcoming product launch. 3 board members called emergency meetings. The stock began to dip. Protesters gathered outside Drake Nova headquarters holding signs that read, "Respect is not optional, and dignity can't be erased." News anchors stopped calling him a visionary and started calling him volatile. One investor group put out a memo calling for an ethics review. His publicist quit. The media dubbed it the $200 million sentence. But still, he couldn't understand it. Why are people acting like I committed a crime, he barked to Jonah on day 3. She spilled wine on me. Because you didn't just scold her, Jonah said softly. You degraded her. Carter looked at him like he was a stranger. So what am I supposed to do? Bow to her now? Jonah's silence said everything. That night, Carter tried to post an apology video. He sat in front of a camera reciting words written by the remaining PR staff, but the tone was all wrong. He looked like he was reading a ransom note. The comments flooded in faster than the likes. Too little, too late. You only care because you got caught. Where was this energy when she stood in front of you? Carter deleted the video. And Naomi? She didn't post anything. And no interviews yet. No response. Her silence grew louder every day like a question hanging in the air. The world waited. What would she say? Would she forgive? Would she fight? Would she rise? And the truth was, she didn't know yet, but she had time now. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't just background music. She was the song. The power of silence. 3 days after the banquet, the world still hadn't moved on. But Naomi Bennett had. Not out of ego or arrogance, but because she had lived too many quiet, invisible years to believe fame would save her. The attention was loud, yes, but it wasn't stable. Viral moments faded. Trends vanished. What remained was how you chose to carry yourself through them. Naomi had always carried herself with grace, even when no one watched. Now the world was watching, and she refused to let them define her next step. Her phone didn't stop buzzing. Messages poured in from strangers around the world. Some called her a hero. Others asked if she would speak. Some wanted her on podcasts, on TV, on magazine covers. Offers came from clothing brands, human rights campaigns, even book publishers. Her face had become a symbol. But Naomi didn't want to be a symbol. She wanted to be herself. And before she accepted any spotlight, she needed to understand what her voice sounded like, not the world's. She took long walks in the park near her apartment. She turned off the news. She kept working at the hotel for another 2 shifts until the manager, in tears, gently told her she needed to take a break. "Naomi," she said, "people aren't coming here for food anymore. They're coming here hoping to see you. This isn't safe or fair to you. You're more than a tray in your hand." Naomi understood. She hugged Mrs. Rivera, clocked out, and went home. That night, she finally returned a call she had been avoiding. It was Elliot Stone. His voice was warm, low, the kind of calm that made you feel like everything was going to be all right. "I've waited to call," he said, "not because I didn't care, but because I didn't want to be another voice telling you what you should do." "Thank you," Naomi said sincerely. "I watched what happened," Elliot continued. "I also watched what you didn't do. You didn't lash out. You didn't make a show. You stood still and strong. That told me more about your strength than any speech ever could." Naomi stayed quiet, listening. "I'd like to offer you something," Elliot said, "but only if it's something you want. Not because of what happened, but because of who you are." She waited. "I run a foundation," he continued, "focused on ethical leadership and workplace equality. We've needed someone to lead our new initiative for service industry justice. Better conditions, better respect, better training. You'd be the face of it, yes, but also its heart." Naomi blinked, caught off guard. "I don't have a degree," she said softly. "I'm not hiring a degree," Elliot replied. "I'm hiring a backbone." Naomi let out a soft laugh. For the first time in days, it felt like air actually reached her lungs. "Can I think about it?" "You can take all the time you need," he said. "I trust your pace." After they hung up, Naomi didn't cry, but her hands trembled. Not from fear, from the weight of a choice she'd never been offered before. Direction. Meanwhile, Carter Drake sat in the silence of his penthouse office, the walls around him more glass than comfort now. Every inch of him felt exposed. The mirror in the bathroom no longer reflected a winner. It showed a man being rejected by his board, stalked by public outrage, and hunted by the ghosts of his own arrogance. His executive assistant, Jonah, had quietly resigned the day before. "I'm sorry," Jonah had said, "but I can't work for a man who thinks dignity is negotiable." His top client had walked too, citing ethical incompatibility. Carter's inbox was flooded with cold legalese, contract terminations, sponsorship withdrawals, scheduled audits. Even his mother had called, her voice disappointed but not surprised. "Carter," she had said, "you've been cruel for years. This time, the world just saw it." That one hurt more than he admitted. Still, Carter refused to apologize publicly again, not sincerely at least. He hired a crisis management firm that suggested a redemption campaign, a charity appearance, a donation to racial justice initiatives, maybe even a partnership with Naomi herself. The idea made him scoff. "Why should I bow to someone who got in the way of my success?" he muttered to the mirror one night. But the mirror didn't answer, and slowly Carter began to realize he was losing something bigger than just money. He was losing relevance. People didn't just hate him, they had stopped needing him. That was the true punishment. On the seventh day, Naomi finally stepped outside to attend a public forum. It wasn't a press conference. It wasn't staged. It was organized by a local community center in downtown LA. The subject, respect in the workplace. They asked her to speak, not as a viral star, but as a woman who had worked in visible jobs her whole life. Naomi didn't have a speech. She didn't bring notes. She wore a simple blouse and jeans, no makeup, just her. She stood at the podium, looked out over the faces, and took a breath. "I didn't plan to be here," she said, "and I never thought one quiet moment would turn into a loud one." The room was silent, waiting. "I didn't speak that night because I didn't think anyone would hear me. I've worked jobs where you don't get heard, you just get told. You serve, you smile, you move on. But that night, something cracked, not in me, but around me. And I realized silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's power that refuses to shout applause." She looked down, trying not to tear up. "I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes. I'm not special because I was insulted. I'm just someone who's tired of pretending that respect is optional. It's not. It's the minimum. And we shouldn't have to go viral to get it." The applause grew louder. Standing ovation. Naomi stepped away from the mic, and for the first time in her life, she felt not just seen, but valued. Later that evening, Carter watched a clip of her speech on his phone, jaw tight. He saw the standing ovation, the tears in people's eyes, the comments praising Naomi for her grace and strength. He set the phone down. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse, watching the city lights flicker below. He used to believe success was about control, dominance, the ability to walk into any room and make it his. But now, Naomi had done more with silence than he ever had with speeches. And deep down, for the first time, Carter felt something he didn't recognize. It wasn't shame. It wasn't anger. It was loss. Not of the deal, not of the company, but of himself. Because if Naomi had found her voice in silence, then what did that say about the man who only found power in shouting? He wasn't sure anymore. But the world was. When dignity echoes louder than power, 3 weeks had passed since the night that changed everything. What had begun as an ordinary evening in a high-end hotel now lived in headlines, classrooms, courtrooms, and dinner conversations across the country. But Naomi Bennett had not become a celebrity. She had become something rarer, a symbol of quiet strength in a world addicted to noise. Naomi had declined offers for TV appearances. She said no to 3 documentary proposals and ignored a fashion brand that wanted to feature her in a campaign called Grace Under Fire. She didn't want to be packaged or sold. What she did say yes to, however, was something no one expected, a return to the hotel. But not as a waitress. Elliot Stone had made good on his offer. Naomi was now the director of a new initiative under the Stone Foundation called Shift Forward, designed to improve working conditions and representation for frontline workers across industries, hotels, restaurants, retail, healthcare. It wasn't just a campaign, it was a movement. And as her first act, Naomi returned to the Four Seasons, this time in a navy blue blazer and flats, standing in front of the very staff she had once served alongside. Housekeepers, bellhops, servers, receptionists, they had gathered in the conference room, not because they were required to, but because they wanted to see her. Naomi stood at the front with a microphone in her hand but didn't speak right away. She looked into the eyes of every staff member. These were her people, not followers, not employees, people. Then she began. "I was one of you," she said, "and I still am. I know what it feels like to keep your head down when someone talks down to you. I know how silence can feel like the only thing you're allowed to use to protect yourself. But now I also know, when silence is chosen, not forced, it becomes power." Heads nodded. Some eyes welled. "I'm not here to lecture," she continued. "I'm here to build. With you. For you. We're going to create policies that protect you, training that uplifts you, and leadership that respects you. Because dignity doesn't come with a price tag, it comes with courage. The applause was thunderous, not because it was rehearsed, but because it was real. Meanwhile, in the cold halls of a company once built on dominance, Carter Drake sat in a boardroom now filled with lawyers instead of leaders. The Drake Nova board had passed a vote of no confidence. He was being removed as CEO, and the investors had agreed to buy out his remaining shares. The company would be restructured under a new name, and Carter Drake, once hailed as the face of innovation, was now a face they didn't want associated with the brand. The final sting came when one of the board members, a woman named Helena Cho, looked him in the eye and said, "This isn't just about money, Carter. This is about trust. And trust doesn't return with quarterly gains. It returns with humility, which unfortunately you never built." Carter didn't respond. He simply nodded, stood, and walked out of the building he once ruled. For the first time in 20 years, he had nowhere to go, no meetings, no partners, no agenda. He checked into a small hotel under an alias, no staff rushing to greet him, no free upgrades, just a key card and a room. That night, Carter sat on the balcony staring at the city skyline. Lights glittered like artificial stars, and for the first time, he didn't feel above them. He felt below. He thought about Naomi, not as a rival, not even as a symbol, but as a person he hadn't even looked in the eyes when he spoke those words. He had seen her as less, as unimportant, and yet she had stood taller than him, without raising her voice, without raising a hand, just by standing still. He wondered what her life had been like. What had taught her to hold her head up when someone tried to push it down? Carter didn't sleep that night, and in the morning, for the first time in his adult life, he made no calls. The world kept talking about Naomi, though. News outlets ran editorials praising her unshakable resolve. Schools invited her to speak to young students. A university offered her an honorary degree in human dignity and leadership, but she hadn't forgotten where she came from. She still bought groceries from the same corner store. She still called her mother every night, and every weekend, she volunteered at the same shelter where she used to serve food on her days off. Only now, they let her speak too. One afternoon, while walking out of the shelter, Naomi received a brown envelope slipped under her car's windshield. No return address, no note. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Naomi, I know I don't deserve your time. I know what I said cannot be undone. But I've been learning that consequences are not just about punishment, they are about change. I am not asking for your forgiveness, I am asking for your understanding. I grew up thinking success gave me the right to speak however I wanted. I never learned how to see people until I saw you not react. You didn't yell, you didn't shrink, you didn't try to prove anything. You just stood, and that told the world who the real leader was that night. I don't expect this to fix anything. I just wanted to tell you that I see now what I failed to see then. Thank you for your silence. It said everything I needed to hear." Carter. Naomi read the letter twice, then folded it, then sat in her car for a long time. She didn't cry, but her hands trembled. Because sometimes the most powerful apology is not a performance, it's an admission, a surrender. Not of pride, but of illusion. She didn't know what Carter would become, whether he would truly change or disappear. But for the first time, she felt that perhaps, just perhaps, the man who had once insulted her had finally started listening, not to her words, but to her silence. And that, in itself, was something. The legacy we leave. Months had passed since the night a sentence changed the course of 2 lives. The viral storm had slowed, the headlines moved on, the hashtags faded, and new controversies captured public attention. But for Naomi Bennett and Carter Drake, the aftermath was not a trend to forget. It was a turning point that kept unfolding, quietly but profoundly. Naomi had accepted Elliot Stone's offer not to chase fame, but to make something real. The initiative she led, Shift Forward, was no longer a campaign. It had grown into a national movement. Over 50 companies had signed on to her workplace dignity charter. Hotels began offering workshops on unconscious bias. Restaurants introduced empathy training for both staff and customers. And through it all, Naomi remained grounded. She still lived in the same neighborhood, still rode the bus when she could, still wore her simple cross pendant every day, a gift from her grandmother who once told her, "Child, your silence will not always be weakness. Sometimes it's a sword they can't take from you." One cool afternoon, Naomi found herself standing in front of a group of students at a university auditorium. She hadn't planned on becoming a speaker, but schools kept calling, not for inspiration, but for truth. She stood on stage in front of a packed hall, hundreds of young eyes watching. "When I was growing up," she said, "I thought power came with titles, CEOs, senators, celebrities. But I've learned something different." She paused. "Power is how you treat someone who can do nothing for you." The room was silent. Then a soft ripple of applause spread, followed by a standing ovation. She didn't speak long. She never did. But the few words she shared always carried the weight of someone who knew what it meant to be ignored and what it took to rise with grace. Carter, meanwhile, had vanished from the headlines, and most believed he had gone into hiding or moved to another country. But he hadn't. He had simply chosen something unfamiliar: anonymity. He sold his condo, donated most of his designer suits, deleted his social media, and for 6 months he volunteered at a food pantry in a quiet part of Oakland under the name Tom. Not to escape consequences, but to understand them. At first, the work felt beneath him, scrubbing pots, sweeping floors, packing canned goods for strangers. But over time, he realized something no balance sheet had ever taught him. Value is not assigned by titles. It's earned through how you show up for others. He listened to stories of single mothers juggling 2 jobs, of war veterans who had lost everything, of young men trying to break out of cycles they never chose. Slowly, without realizing it, Carter changed. Not all at once, not with some grand redemption arc, but piece by piece. One afternoon, while sweeping the pantry hallway, a young volunteer approached him. "Hey, Tom," the boy said, "someone dropped off a letter for you. I think it's real." Carter opened the envelope. Inside was a folded card, simple white stock, handwritten words in blue ink. "Carter, I don't know if you'll ever be the same man again, but I believe people can change if they want to. I don't hate you. I don't even pity you. I just hope you find a better way to lead than the one you thought made you powerful. Not because the world is watching, but because no one is. Naomi." He sat on the bench outside the pantry for over an hour, staring at those words. He didn't cry, but he felt something finally settle in his chest that had been dislodged for years, a strange peace. Because forgiveness is never earned, but sometimes it's acknowledged.